There are some stories that never truly leave the collective memory. Stories soaked in isolation, paranoia, and silence. And then there are those that feel as though something still lingers in the shadows long after the people are gone. In 1922, in a remote corner of Bavaria, an entire family was murdered inside an old farmhouse. 6 bodies, no witnesses, and a disturbing possibility that the killer may have lived among them for days afterward. This is the story of Hinterkaifeck, one of Germany's most chilling and still unsolved murders to this day. In this episode of the Loft Sessions, we're going to delve into the strange events leading up to the murders of 6 family members. From footsteps in the snow, to missing keys, to sounds coming from the attic. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the killer's quiet, patient footsteps inside the walls of a home that would soon become a tomb. Hinterkaifeck was never a village. In fact, it wasn't even a hamlet. It was simply the name given to a small farmstead, isolated from neighbours by fields, trees, and the seemingly endless quiet of rural Bavaria. The Gruber family had lived there for years. 63-year-old Andreas, his wife 72-year-old Cecilia, and their widowed daughter Victoria Gabrielle, who was 35. She had 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and baby Joseph, who was 2 years old. Now on the surface it was a typical farming household of the era, but beneath that were darker rumours, whispers of abuse, incest and fear, all of which will become chilling footnotes once the murders came to light. 6 months before the murders, Crescens Rieger, the family's maid, abruptly fled the farm. She claimed she heard footsteps in the attic and whispers when there was nobody else in the farmstead. She spoke of the house being haunted, but in hindsight her fear might have been grounded in something far more human. Now a week before the murders, Andreas told neighbours that he had found footsteps leading from the forest directly towards the farm. But more strangely, the footsteps didn't return from the farm back to the forest. They were only going one way. Around the same time, a Munich newspaper one of the family never subscribed to was found in the home. A set of house keys disappeared, locks were tampered with. That same night, members of the Gruber family reported of hearing strange sounds coming from the attic. Now Andreas went on to search the space but found no one. Although he disclosed these incidents to several acquaintances, he declined any offers of assistance, and the matter was never reported to the police. On the evening of March the 31st, 1922, something or someone lured the family into the barn one by one. Now investigators would later go on to believe that either noises were heard outside or the killer cleverly imitated them, drawing each victim out separately. Inside the barn, 4 bodies were found later stacked atop one another beneath hay. Andreas, Cecilia and Victoria were later discovered lifeless in the barn, and if that isn't chilling enough, Victoria's young 7-year-old daughter, also named Cecilia, was also discovered, again lifeless. But it does seem apparent that this younger child had fought for life, and she may have been alive for many hours after the initial attack on her and as well as her family members, because she was found holding clumps of her own hair. It seems that in the melee, or if she was in pain, she was pulling at her own hair, and like I said, she was found discovered holding clumps of her own hair. It would then appear that the killer then entered the house and murdered baby Josef and the new maid Maria Baumgartner, hired on the very day she died. All of this was done with a farming mattock, a brutal, heavy tool that belonged to the property itself. The murders were swift, silent and devastating. This next part of the story is just something that has haunted many investigators for decades. For 4 days after the murders, smoke was seen rising from the farmhouse chimney. Neighbours heard the dog barking inside. Footprints were found where someone had walked to the stables and tended to the animals. Food appeared to have been eaten, beds were disturbed, and candles had been lit at night. Now, whoever had murdered the Gruber family stayed in their home afterwards, calm, comfortable, unseen. And this would suggest that the killer may not have been a stranger, or worse still, they may have been living on the property long before the murders. 4 days elapsed between the murders and the discovery of the victims. On April the 1st, coffee salesmen arrived at Hinterkaifeck to take an order, and when no one answered their knocks on the doors or windows, they searched the yard but found the property seemingly deserted. They observed that the gate to the machine room stood open, yet chose to leave without investigating further. During this period, young Cecilia Gabriel's unexplained absence from school raised concerns, and the entire Gruber family failed to attend Sunday worship, which was highly unusual. Now, on the morning of the 4th of April, local mechanic Albert Hoffner visited the farm to repair a piece of machinery. After waiting for an hour without seeing any member of the household, he carried out the repair on his own and departed after approximately 4.5 hours. Later that afternoon, and at around 3:30 p.m, Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann and his stepson Josef, unrelated to Victoria's son Josef Gruber, to the farmstead to check on the family. When the boys returned reporting no sign of life, Schlittenbauer went to Hinterkaifeck himself, accompanied by neighbours Michael Poll and Jakob Seeger. Upon entering the barn, the men discovered the bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife, his daughter and his granddaughter. Moments later, they would make the discovery of 2 more bodies, that of the maid Maria Baumgartner and the young child Josef, and they were discovered in the living quarters at the farm. The Bavarian police were both overwhelmed and ill-equipped. Decisions were rushed, evidence was incomplete, and in a move that proved disastrous, the farmhouse was demolished the following year, wiping out any remaining forensic clues. From the outset, the inquiry was crippled. The crime scene had been desecrated by curious onlookers who trampled through the barn, disturbed the dead, rifled through belongings, and even cooked themselves meals in the Gruber's kitchen while the bodies lay only meters away. On the 5th of April, amid the cold gloom of the barn, court physician Johann Baptist Ohlmüller carried out the autopsies. His findings were grim. A mattock was identified as the most probable murder weapon. Even more disturbing was the revelation that young Cecilia had clung to life for hours after the assault, long enough to tear out her own hair in handfuls as she lay dying in the straw. The victims' skulls were removed and dispatched to Munich for further analysis. The earliest suspicion was down to robbery, prompting investigators to interrogate vagrants, other workers and villagers from the surrounding hamlets. Now, that theory collapsed when substantial sums of money were found untouched inside the home. Instead, the evidence pointed to a far more chilling possibility. The killer or killers had stayed on the property. The cattle had been fed, the family's entire supply of bread consumed, and meat recently carved from the pantry stores. Someone had lived among the corpses. Now, with no motive and no clarity, the investigators began to painstakingly try to put any clue they had together. Though arrests were made over the years, no one was ever charged. The investigation was formally closed in 1955, and the last interrogations took place in 1986 before Detective Chief Superintendent Conrad Mueller-Thuman retired, leaving the case to decay in silence. However, the most prominent suspect was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbour who had once had a relationship with Victoria. He was widely believed to be the father of baby Joseph. Now, from all accounts, he had a spare set of keys, and he could allow himself into the farmstead at will. He was seen many times going into the barn, and again, he did this on his own accord. He would do this sometimes without actually being invited. It was also said that he behaved in ways observers described as being too calm, but there was never any evidence, there was no proof that he was guilty of the murders of these family members. Other theories included a drifter living secretly in the attic, a vagrant passing through Bavaria, a family feud turned violent, or a military-trained intruder familiar with rural isolation. Yet every lead collapsed under the weight of speculation and a lack of physical evidence. The farmhouse is long gone. All that stands today is a memorial stone marking where the barn and house once stood. But the story of Hinterkaifeck endures. Not because of the brutality of the murders, but because of the quiet moments leading up to them, the missing keys, the footsteps in the snow, the sounds in the attic, and the slow, steady smoke from a chimney after 6 people were already dead. It is a story of isolation and the terrifying possibility that someone is closer than you think. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the Hinterkaifeck murders of 1922. If you've heard this story before, or even if you haven't heard this story before, please comment down below. Also, please share this video if you can, because it does help the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe to the Days of Horror YouTube channel. We bring out videos each and every Monday evening at 7:05 UK time. Please click the notification bell, because that will notify you as and when the next video is about to premiere. There's also a new feature called Hype. If you click that again helps promote the video as well as the channel. But in the meantime, we want to stay safe, stay curious, and I will be back soon with more tales here from the Loft Sessions very, very soon.